Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, this is Peter Joseph, and you're listening to V Radio.
Good evening, and welcome to this edition of V Radio. Tonight, my guests are Jake and Mike, the Fire Team for Freedom. Before we get into that, I'm going to go through my typical announcements. If this is your first time listening to V Radio, please visit my website, v-radio or v-radio.org. There in my archives, you can find more shows like this one. You can also find my zeitgeist, or not just zeitgeist, but basically must-see TV list of free documentaries that you can watch on the internet. I have a forum there. There's a Facebook group there. It's also where you can find the link for the Facebook group for my upcoming documentary about internet trolls. In addition, if you like V Radio, consider supporting V Radio by going to the donate page. For every dollar value of your donation, you are entered into a raffle. The person who wins at the end of the month wins a free item from the V Radio store. So, all of that jazz being said, which I honestly should just record at some point because I have to say it every show, let's introduce our guests, Jake and Mike. Welcome to V Radio.
Thanks, Neil. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Now,
glad to be back on the radio.
Excellent. Glad to have you. You guys, this show was one of my favorite shows during the old Ron Paul radio days, and I love staying up for it. You always had a really late, it was like midnight or something, if I remember right, really late show. So I guess what I generally do is I have each one of my guests, regardless of who they are, introduce themselves by telling the story of what made them decide to become activists. What was the precipice moment in their lives that made them decide to go from being part of the world to being someone who's trying to make it better? I'll start with you, Jake.
For me, Mike actually played a pretty big role in that. I was in college up in South Dakota. I had just gotten out of 4 years of active duty with the Marine Corps, and I can say that while I was in the Marines, I definitely saw some things taking place that made me feel like something in the world is not right. That the politicians are maybe not looking out for the best interest, especially for us service members, and just basically everybody in the country. But I think the actual pivotal moment for me was I was on the phone one day with Mike, and he told me to check out Ron Paul, and I looked him up on the internet, and that evening there was a debate, and prior to that I hadn't been all that involved in politics and whatnot, but based on his advice, I turned it on and I watched it, and boy, I'll tell you, it was just everything that Ron Paul said made so much sense to me. It just suddenly, it was like the entire world made sense to me, and that quickly. And I sat up all night and I watched every Ron Paul video that was out there. And this is the kind of information, once you really kind of take a step back from the matrix and realize what's going on, it's hard not to participate in speaking up. It's something that if you have a conscience and you have any kind of personal trait to do what's right, you have to say something. So that's kind of my memory of me becoming a activist.
Kind of ironic, actually. That's very similar to what got me started. Was a friend linking me Ron Paul Courageously Tells the Truth on YouTube. When he starts explaining, well, they don't attack us because we're free. They attack us because we've been bombing their country for 10 years, blah, blah, blah. I was just like, did he just actually say that? It's like, wow. I was never really a sheep. I had just kind of thrown my hands up in the air and said, you know what, screw politics. These people all suck. And then somebody started speaking the truth. And then I did more research, and he wasn't the only one at the time. Congressman Dennis Kucinich, spoke his mind. Senator Mike Gravel became a friend of mine, all that. But it was still unusual in that election season to have so many controversial candidates really talking about the issues honestly. So that brings me to you, Mike.
Yeah, I'll say that mine, I think I started a little bit differently. I think thinking back to like my childhood, I think like looking at my dad, he was kind of a a pillar of the community as far as I could see, being a child and looking up to him. I saw, a lot of the community like looking to him to, fix things, to lead people, to show other people the way. And, he was always kind of helping people, solve their problems. And so, I kind of took on that idea that, that's the way I wanted to be as well. Reading books. I think one of the first books that I can remember reading was The Battle for Wake Island, and kind of living that in my own mind, thinking, what am I going to do when the chips are down? I'm going to be the one that's going to be, telling people, let's take these SOBs out, And so I kind of, for a long time, I, kind of lived my life with that kind of ideal. Now, I probably to a certain extent lived in the matrix thinking, that, like most people think, or at least the larger population, that, the storyline that we're all told is the one that we're supposed to be doing. So, I was involved, I watched Reagan's campaign. I was a big Reagan supporter even when I was like in my teenage years. And, I was looking forward to, when I enlisted in the Army, serving under Reagan because I thought he was a great leader. Since I've learned a little bit more about him, but, I might have
just
been
a little.
But, I still think he had in some sense, he was trying to do the right thing. I don't think all the people in his administration were definitely doing the right thing. But in any case, fast forward to Ron Paul 2007, the debate where he gets into it with Giuliani, and that's really where I wake up to, the reality that I'm in today, which is, I notice that there's quite a few things different than what I believed before.
Now, it's interesting that you pointed that out because, ironically, Ron Paul quoted Ronald Reagan quite a bit and worked with him. There were certain aspects of, even Reagan that I agreed with, like Ron Paul would quote Ronald Reagan's foreign policy, like, he didn't understand the irrationality of Middle Eastern politics, and then, that's why he wasn't going to send any more troops into that circumstance, because culturally it just was not a good idea, regardless of, anything he thought was going to come out of it. But regardless, though, you've learned more about him since then, and honestly, it's I can't really think of a president that ever even gets close to it without, in some way selling out to somebody. Ironically, Jimmy Carter seems to be, I don't know him well enough, but I studied him a little better. This guy before Reagan, and at one point he just kind of blatantly says to the American people, okay, well, here's the deal. We're having energy problems, and we're consuming entirely too much, and we probably shouldn't do that anymore. So being told the truth, made sure that he didn't get elected again. But in any case, now, one of the reasons why I called you guys on specifically for this topic is that I've covered this in the past in V Radio, and it kind of, when I thought about it, it rang true and to a lot of the things I remember listening to on you guys' show. And it has to do with the fact that, first of all, we have a lot of protesters in the world, who I understand their animosity because they're anti-war. And so therefore, as a result of that, they become anti-soldier. You don't see this as much as you used to. During the Vietnam era, you'd have guys getting off the plane and they'd be spitting on them and stuff like that, as if, and calling them baby killers or whatever. The funny thing about all of that, is that, like, that's what the first Rambo movie was actually supposed to be about. And most people didn't really pay attention to the message that they were trying to show there, which was just, we send these people off to do horrific things, we bring them home, and then we crap on them, as if it's their fault that they got drafted and sent over there against their will. It's a little different nowadays, obviously, but the other attitude that I noticed is from more of the survivalist conspiracy theory types is that, They hate the military and they see it as an object of the state. And the funny thing is I know several, former servicemen who would agree that what the military has been used for in the past is obviously, motivated by corrupt interests, whether you believe it's corporations or corrupt politicians. It doesn't really change that, but they also seem to think that as long as they lock themselves up in their compounds with guns, that they will in some fashion be able to successfully hold a revolution against the United States military in the event that it was ever called in to uphold a fascist dictatorship. And I mean, I've never been a soldier. I've never served, but I've talked to many who have. I watch the show Future Weapons quite a bit, and that's just the stuff they're willing to talk about. It's just not practical to think that we could, without some kind of collaboration from the military, protect ourselves under those circumstances. Don't get me wrong. I think owning a firearm in the event of a collapse is a good idea, but I think that it's, especially if our politics is to be anti-soldier, when a corrupt government wants to get their soldiers to do things to the people, they're going to feed those soldiers all kinds of propaganda to convince them. They're going to say, well, these people are evil, so therefore it's okay that you're rounding them up in camps and lining them up or shooting them or whatever they have in mind. This is the exact same kind of crap that the Nazis did to get farmers, who became soldiers to round people up and put them on cattle trucks and send them off. And if we go out of our way to alienate those people, then we're basically playing into the hands of anybody who would want to convince a soldier that that was appropriate. If we're spitting on them and yelling at them and screaming at them, or even worse, throwing stuff or being violent during protests, it just makes it easier for any elite entity, to convince the soldiers that we're the bad guys. Now, what do you guys think about that? I'll start with Mike.
Well, it's interesting that they always play the different groups against each other, and regardless of who it is, if it's city people versus country people, you can almost get to the point where you can get people to the ideal that they absolutely hate the other side, whatever they are. And I think in a lot of ways we see that almost every day played out in different things, TV shows. And I was just watching the other day, the Wall Street protest. There's a policeman that sprayed a couple ladies with mace, and they identified this guy, and I think they even put his name out on Facebook and his address and his phone number. And to a certain extent I thought, oh boy, this is not going to be good, because what's going to happen is you basically get both sides aggravated.
Right.
You give the police an opportunity to see how idiotic people can be. This police officer, no matter what he did, now his family's involved. His wife and his kids could possibly be threatened because people know where his address. And that really gets the police, to a point where they are in a emotional mode,
Right.
And on the other side, you've got the same thing where the people are saying, these thugs, these SOBs, they shouldn't be doing that, And so, you've got to be a little more understanding of the particular situation and understand how to deal with it best. In my little blog there, I put together a couple scenes from the movie Gandhi. In the movie, like one of his first protests, he's burning his ID card, and he's burning like the whole group's ID cards. And the police come and they say, don't burn your ID, And so he takes his ID and he sets it on fire, and you can just see the level of anger in the policeman rising, and then he grabs like a whole drawer full of other people's and he starts throwing them in the fire, and of course the policeman comes over and hits him and knocks him down, and he falls to the ground, and then he grabs another one and he throws it in the fire, and the guy says, "Don't